Deity knows us one by one, each couple, each daughter, each son. The framework of the capitulos, our path, our future, our action shows. We will go into the world, our faith is strong and our beliefs are true. Within us the flag of deity unfurled, because we know what we must do.
One day Shania asked me, "What is the greatest of all blessings for Estolians?" I explained that the consummation of a union upon a man's 30th birthday was seen to be the greatest of all blessings. I finished my explanation. For the man willing to keep the promise that Zacharias made to deity the very instant he is able to do so, it is said his blessings will be the greatest of all. She pointed out, "I have known Feldrum 6 months. Antania keeps his soul, and he is a man blessed to have her. I know he was willing to keep the promise of Zacharias, but he was unable to do so. Many of the men who are now wed to the captives from the Osifino were beyond their birthday. Does deity punish them, give them fewer blessings?" I loved Shania more then than I think I did before. I did not linger long on the answer to her question. It is, perhaps, a measure of a man's desires and intentions. A man who would keep the promise but is not given the opportunity until later in his 30th year is not denied those greater blessings. Deity sees within us, knows our hearts, and rewards us accordingly. Tremaine Antimonius, Capitulo 11.
Dominic swiveled in his chair and picked up the ensayo that had so profoundly affected him as a youth. It was the primary influence in his decision regarding how he would approach romance, matrimony, and having his soul kept. Written by Fleur, the 80th Queen of Estolia, the ensayo told the story of her marriage to Kai Doro. When she met him, he was the heir apparent, the son of the 79th King of Estolia. He was visiting her brother's chalet in Perpignan in the south of France. Fleur was never quite fluent in the Estolian language. She opted to dictate her ensayo to an acolyte from France, but without the help of a translator. Though her grammar was simple, she had an engaging way of expressing herself. Dominic could easily imagine her thick French accent narrating the ensayo in his mind as he read. She wrote about the series of momentous events that changed her life dramatically. She woke up one night on a sailing ship, and did not know how she got there, nor where it was going. The captain of the ship introduced her to Kai Doro, who treated her with the proper amount of respect prescribed for interactions between a gentleman and a lady. Kai Doro said he was taking her with him to Estolia, his country, at her brother's request. The journey from France to Estolia took much longer than expected, and they were not yet at their destination when Kai Doro reached his 30th birthday. The next part of the ensayo was the critical passage. With her limited vocabulary, Fleur explained how Kai Doro was allowed to be alone with her for the first time during the voyage, and that night he took advantage of that freedom, and took advantage of her, by seducing her, tying her to him, permanently. In the ensayo, Fleur spoke fondly of her husband, the 80th king after Zacharias, but when Dominic read the account as a teenager, he believed that she was unhappy, even terrified to be abducted and seduced, confused and alone, without family. He thought she was coerced into accepting Kai Doro. In that era, she would have had precious little choice. After the passage that described his seduction of her, complete with wine and Mayberry fruit, she then spoke about her brother. She explained that her brother had died, that Kai Doro was with him at the end, and that it was her brother's dying wish that Fleur should travel with him to Estolia. She said she was grateful that her brother was with his friend, and not alone when he died. Dominic was convinced, however, that a darker interpretation could explain events that Fleur so blithely wrote about. She had only Kai Doro's word as to how her brother perished. Could he also be guilty of murder along with abduction, coercion, and seduction? His imagination ran with it, and he was convinced when he first read the account that his ancestor was one of the worst of men. So Dominic decided to forego the blessings of deity. He would abstain from marriage and intimacy altogether. To his mind, that was better than yielding to the temptation to take a woman against her will. He was afraid that if he embraced the Estolian way fully, he would be tempted to follow the example of so many of his ancestors. The one thing that bothered him above all others was the way his relatives read the same stories and did not think there was anything wrong with them. He was faintly disgusted by the way they considered it acceptable to abduct and seduce women, forcing them to live their lives in Estolia. He was fascinated by the ensayos, though, to his mind, the writing of the women mattered more than that of the men. He wanted to see Estolia through their viewpoint. There was a marked contrast when he read the transcribed writing of Estoliana. She described Zacharias asking her to be his, and he was willing to defy deity to protect her right to be consulted. His feelings on the subject were recorded in the archives, and were required reading for all acolytes. Now, when he reread Fleur's ensayo, he could not really pinpoint the phrase, sentence, or paragraph that had disturbed him. It was the same volume he had read as a teenager, but the words just did not convey the message he remembered. As teenagers, he and his brother Gregorio discussed his impressions, and they both felt strongly about the double standards that existed both in the greater world and in Estolia. Gregorio was adamant that he would not expect anything from his future wife that he did not himself possess. He could not expect her to be pure and virginal unless he himself could claim the same. He believed that all Estolian men should aspire to maintain their purity until they gave their soul into the keeping of the woman, whom deity prepared to be his perfect soulmate. Gregorio vowed to hold his body as pure as he would expect to find the woman who would keep his soul. In addition, he decided that he would not accept any woman who could not show him her aura. Dominic did not trust himself enough to make that same decision. He chose, instead, to avoid intimacy and marriage altogether. The men in the Capitolos always seemed to end up forcing their will on the women they met. He did not wish to force any woman to accept him, and, as he saw it, the only way to be certain was to make it his goal to never marry or be intimate with any woman.
Our place, our land, we know all that deity commands. We feel the blessings granted us, sons and daughters of Zacharias. We will go into the world. Our faith is strong, beliefs are true. Within us the flag of deity unfurls, because we know what we must do.